glasses of water in front of me, so I am ready to go.
All right, excellent. Okay, so I'm seeing Kent in Chicago. For those of you who are just joining us, Ashley from the Discover team, here with Jay Clouse, and I just want to make sure that we have our AV set up well. So if you could confirm, type in the comments that you can see us, that you can hear us okay. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And for those of you who have been dialed in for a moment, let us know where you are in your podcast journey. Do you have an existing podcast? Are you thinking of this as something that is a new endeavor? And, let's make sure. Okay, thank you. Conrad says, looking good. And Dylan's saying that we can hear and see. Oh, from Friendswood, Texas. That sounds like a very pleasant place. Denver, Colorado.
Mike Short, Mike Lim, Dylan. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining and hanging out for a little bit with us here. Conrad, great to hear from you.
Trisha, representing Trinidad and Tobago. All right. Yes. We've got some international crowd here, Vancouver. It's wonderful to hear from each of you. Terrific. Trisha, thinking about starting a podcast. We've got some folks, looks like from Europe also tuning in, who have podcasts going. I honestly am really excited to hear from Jay today. This is a little bit of a meta session that we have going on, because Jay, you started out podcasting, right, for doing your own creative endeavor. And now you are helping others who are also in this podcast journey identify and develop ways to get more professional looking, find their voice, identify their style. And I'm, those of you who are here in our audience, which is even more global than when I last looked. We've got Kingston, Jamaica represented, Las Vegas, Mexico City, Basque Country. All right. And Bucharest. This is Jay, we've got some, we're going to have some global themes in our podcasts from today.
Yeah. I'm seeing the notes about being a little quiet. So I'm going to get closer to the mic. I'm going to project a little bit more and make sure that everything's coming through clear for you guys.
And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit today about how to customize your audio presence.
That is right. That is indeed true.
So like I mentioned, and like many of you probably know, Jay is a terrific podcaster who is quite known for building really professional quality content, audio content. He produces, hosts, all of the above, is the Renaissance man for Creative Elements, which is a podcast, an interview style podcast where you can hear from creators of all stripes talking about their process. And it's a really great way to get a glimpse at how other folks create what they put out into the world.
How about now? I just adjusted the audio in the settings. Is this better for you guys?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty clear here. Let's see. So folks, yeah, if you can give us a thumbs up if that's better for Jay. Looks like we got some comments coming in.
Yeah, we can keep rolling, and if I see that it's still low, I can adjust it even further.
All right. My mic might be a little bit hot. Maybe it's me. We'll turn me down a little bit. So in addition to Creative Elements, Jay's leading community for smart passive income. And I'm curious to know from our audience, how many of you all are dabbling in this environment? What questions do you have? Would love to, I'll be keeping track of the questions. So type away. We will save some time for Q&A at the end. And in the meantime, just to let you all know, there is a replay available for this session. So everything that you hear, if you miss a couple of nuggets of wisdom from Jay, you'll be able to play those back through the YouTube channel. You'll also get an email with the link to replay. And we'll have some great information about Jay's fantastic course. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for the thumbs up here. Looks like we'll keep an eye on the audio. Looks like a lot of folks are hearing better now. So Jay, with that said, I'll turn it over to you. I'll mute myself and maybe that'll clear up some bandwidth for your audio.
Let's do it. Yeah. I am so grateful, everybody, that you're here. I am humbled that you guys would choose to spend an hour here with Ashley and I. And so today we're talking podcasting, as Ashley said. And specifically, I want to talk to you about how to produce a high quality, professional sounding show with a small team or a small budget, because that is my bread and butter. It's where I've been living for the last couple of years, because as an independent podcaster, it's not like I had a huge budget or a huge team to make a show, but I wanted it to be something that was commercially viable, that could actually build an audience. And when people tuned in, they said, oh, wow, this sounds really, really good. And that audio quality, especially being in an audio medium, was something that was remarkable in this show. As Ashley said, my name is Jay Clouse. I've been hosting Creative Elements for a little bit over a year now, where I talk to high-profile creators about how they make a living from their art and creativity. I talk to people like Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income or James Clear. And instead of talking about, their specific work or what they know really well as a subject matter, I talk about how did you actually get to make a living as a creator. I built an educational platform called Freelancing School with courses to help you make a living freelancing. And I'm also a course creator for LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. This workshop here today was born out of my course Podcast Like the Pros that I launched late last year due to demand from my listeners and my readers saying, how do you do this high quality show just as an indie guy? And so I actually pre-sold that to my subscribers and said, if you really want to learn this, tell me and I'll put it together. And there was demand. I did. It's gotten some incredible feedback. People telling me that they wish they had started their course started their podcast after taking the course, that the videos for the podcast course were great, that it was amazing, the best course I've ever taken. But I'm here to convince you, first and foremost, that you should, if you're compelled, start a podcast, because podcasting is incredible. It's an amazing medium that I absolutely love more than anything else. My show, Creative Elements, has been featured on Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Castro, even Apple Podcasts at this point, and I've been able to interview people like Seth Godin, James Clear, Vanessa Van Edwards, Matt Diavella, Ollie Abdal, Pat Flynn, incredible people that I'm just glad that I could meet, let alone spend an hour with and interview and create an actual audio asset out of. And the show has done really well. From launch in March of 2020, literally at the beginning of the pandemic, the show really took off right away. And I think it's due to the audio quality and the quality of the show generally. In the first year of the podcast, we generated more than 500,000 downloads, which I'm super, super proud of. I can't wait to break 1 million sometime this year. It's going to be a feather in the cap that I'm really excited about. And this image is actually a little bit dated. There are now over 200 ratings on Apple Podcasts, all 5 stars. But I love getting feedback like this from David Perel, who's actually a guest on the show. Super successful creator, has one of the most popular courses on Teachable, actually, on how to crush it on Twitter. But he wrote after our interview, "This interview is unlike most of the ones I've done because it's so well edited. It's less like a traditional interview and more like an NPR style show. We spoke about growing a Twitter audience, my time working as a television anchor, and how I failed at every institutional game I've ever played." This type of feedback from guests also really lights me up, because I think as a podcast host, you need to think about your role as host. If you were hosting a dinner party, you would want somebody leaving saying, "I'm so glad that I went there. That was so fun. I can't wait to go back." But a lot of hosts are kind of abrupt. It's a little uncomfortable. And people leave thinking that was not where I wanted to spend my time. And they're not going to refer you. They're not going to want to come back. So I really think about being a host. And I take production quality super, super seriously. Luckily, Creative Elements is not my first podcast, which is why I've been able to do this at such a high level. I had started another show 3 years ago called Upside, and that show has more than 190 episodes now, 165,000 downloads. We've been publishing for 3 years. But also, with Creative Elements, I worked with a podcast network called the Podglomerate. And they work with some other incredible shows in the business category, in the books category. It's been really, really helpful for me as an early stage podcaster. And in the course, actually, I talked to the head of the Podglomerate about how to get on a network, how to leverage a network, why a network is a good thing to do. But you don't need to go on a network. It's just an option for you if you are an indie podcaster.
Hey, Jay, it's seeming to me that there's like a little pop in your audio. It's sounding pretty clear to me, but I don't know if there's maybe a loose wire somewhere or something we can, that there's like a quick troubleshoot for, maybe a pull it out, plug it back in kind of situation.
I think it might be because I auto adjusted the mic volume to work with folks' volume challenges.
I gotcha.
Let me try.
Yeah, isn't that just the way of life? Solving one problem opens up some additional ones.
Let's try this. Let's check that.
Michael is suggesting that the gain might be too high, which suggests to me that Michael knows a little bit about audio.
Well,
I always appreciate that.
I don't
when
have
troubleshooting.
An interface with this mic, so I can't control the gain.
Actually, what I think was the pop has stopped now.
Okay.
Yeah, like more of a crackle, and I'm not hearing it anymore. I'm with you on that one, Judy.
We are.
Yeah, I think that got it. Let's you jump in on me on how much work podcasting is. We've established that it is okay. Dylan confirms that it's
Great.
better. So just so everybody knows, thanks for allowing me to interrupt you there, Jay. We were in the middle of transitioning from how great a medium podcasting is into talking a little bit about the work that it takes.
Yeah. Well, with any creative work, I want people to go into it with their eyes wide open to know what is required here, so that you're not just romanticized into doing something that you think is going to be easy, but you recognize that there are some real commitments you have to make here. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of production work, I want to start with why start a podcast? First and foremost, podcasting is the best networking hack that I have ever found. I mean, I got to sit with Seth Godin for 45 minutes, which just blows my mind. This is somebody that I've looked up to for a very long time, was somebody that I had no idea I could actually get some time with, who was very gracious in coming on the show. Podcasting forces you to become a better speaker, in my opinion. I actually like to think about Toastmasters, which is this incredible organization that has taught people for a really long time how to be a great public speaker. And podcasting is kind of like that, except you can interview anyone. You don't have to have somebody be in your local Toastmasters chapter to work with them to speak in front of them. You can edit your podcast to make yourself sound even better before you publish it. You can listen back to the recordings of your podcast so that you know how that went. And you can get way, way, way more reps, a lot more repetitions, a lot more practice when you're hosting your own podcast. Podcast also helps you create a habit of publishing, which if you want to be a professional creator, you're going to have to get into the habit of publishing. And when you create a podcast, you don't necessarily have to publish every week. I'll talk about that. But being on some sort of consistent cadence that your audience can anticipate and look forward to is really, really important. And this helps you build that muscle. Creating anything, any piece of content, is like making your own lottery ticket, in my opinion. Most of the time, it won't go anywhere, but once in a while, you may hit, it may go viral, it may get a ton of attention, it may get in front of just one person who can fundamentally change your life. And that is worth pursuing, especially if it's something that you enjoy doing, you know? And again, this goes for any creative medium. Maybe you're more suited for writing or video. Anything that you make and put out in the world using your own ideas and taste, that is like printing your own lottery tickets that may just hit. And then we can talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is, what if it goes really well? You know, Joe Rogan, literally the guy from Fear Factor, started a podcast, and he has 11 times more listeners than Howard Stern, like the biggest radio personality on the planet. And this is dated information. This is like circa 2018 that I have this data from. Using some, again, dated information, Joe Rogan had 200 million downloads around 2018. And if he was selling ads on that podcast for a low CPM, which is an advertising metric, of $18, he would be earning somewhere north of 100, maybe even up to $250 million per year in podcast advertising alone. That's like a lot of money. It's a crazy amount of money. And podcasting is only getting more and more popular and more widely known in the United States. An estimated 144 million people in 2019 in the US alone were listening to podcasts. And the people who listen to podcasts listen to an average of 7 podcasts per week. So that's a lot of potential.
It seems like there's a bit more diversity in the audience as well, like a wider array of audience segments are podcasting, listening to podcasts, which is great too, because it's like you get this entire new set of ears to share your creativity with.
Yeah, totally. It's only getting further and further into the culture of America and the subcultures of America. Anything that you want to talk about, any community that you want to tap into or build or serve, podcasting is getting into that community, I guarantee it. But this definitely is not a get-rich-quick scheme, even if Joe Rogan is making a ton of money. He's at the top level, right? There are over 1 million active podcasts, which on one hand sounds like a lot. On another hand, there are a little bit north of 30 million YouTube channels, so 1/30 the size of YouTube. But again, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. Podcasts are typically longer on average than a YouTube video, so there's still a lot of room to grow in podcasting. But if you're going to do it, you'll want to stand out because, yes, people are listening to 7 podcasts per week. Even being one of those 7, you're going to have to fight. And you're going to have to dethrone one of the other podcasts to be in somebody's rotation. So some questions to ask yourself if you're going to get started podcasting. First and foremost, what's the point? What is your goal in podcasting? And I want you to be radically super honest with yourself in this. And that is okay. Whatever your goal is, you just need to admit it and be okay with it. Because if your goal is to build an audience or earn meaningful income from podcasting, that's going to make your choices different than if you just wanted to meet people in your industry, if you wanted to get practice public speaking. You need to be really honest about what your goal is in starting a podcast.
Curious if would love to hear folks as you're listening to Jay's questions. Do you already know your answer for this? If so, would love for you to type it in the chat there, just to kind of get a sense of, from this audience of where your heads are with this. So what are your goals for podcasting? Go ahead, Jay.
And who is your show for? What type of person are you trying to reach with your show? Think not just demographically, but what is that person's point of view? What do they believe? What does it do for that person? And is that already being done for them elsewhere? These I kind of rifled through because I want you to consider them all kind of together. Who is your show for? What is your show doing for that person? And is that already being done elsewhere? Because if your goal is to generate an income or build an audience, you need to make sure you're doing something novel and valuable for that audience. And it doesn't have to be, so crazy, so weird, so unique that it's hard in and of itself to build an audience around, but it should be something that has a clear reason for standing out from the competitors. And it doesn't even have to be competing against podcasts. If somebody is, tuning into your podcast for entertainment, you're now competing with Netflix, Hulu, so you need to have a compelling reason why your show is different. And is your show educational or entertaining? To that point, if you're trying to do an entertainment show, you're competing with huge personalities like Conan O'Brien and Dax Shepard, people who have a lifetime of experience in film and TV. And so it's easier, I think, to do an educational show and stand out and serve people in a way they're not already being served. And it's a different time of day, a different habit when somebody's listening to something for educational value than for entertainment value. It's harder to compete with entertainers. A goal would be to be both educational and entertaining, especially if you are leaning on educational. Of course, you're doing a show, you're doing an audio medium. You want it to be something that's easy to listen to and fun to listen to some degree. But I would, again, try to focus on doing something educational if at all possible. Next, we need to talk about the format of your show. Will you have a co-host? Will you interview guests? Are there any specific recurring segments within your show that make it unique that people might tune in for just because they love this 10-minute segment at the end or the beginning or in the middle where you talk about some specific thing? These recurring elements make your show remarkable and enjoyable and something people anticipate. The thing about co-hosts is it can make it easier to have entertaining, very listenable dialogue before the meat of the show. You don't have to prepare as much or script as much if you have good rapport with your co-host, but it's also an extra layer of logistical challenges when it comes to scheduling interviews or getting the show done generally, because you have to work with another person's schedule. Same thing with guests. You don't need to have guests on your show. You really don't. You can do a solo show, you can do a co-hosted show. Any additional person you bring into any particular episode is making the logistics of that episode more and more challenging. What is your target episode length? How long will your episodes be? There's no clear rule or even limit on this, but you should be intentional about it. Now that the world is opening up again, the average commute pre-pandemic was 26.6 minutes. So it makes sense to have your show be somewhere between 25 to 35 minutes, because even if they listen on 1.5 speed, they can get through that on their commute. And it's something that they can complete and look forward to and make part of their routine. And how often will you publish? All of these questions that I've listed here, people have kind of assumed or default answers. A lot of people think, oh, I've got to interview guests, I've got to do a weekly show, and I'm going to have it be about 60 minutes. Those are all assumptions that are common, but aren't something you need to do. You can have a solo hosted show that's sub 20 minutes that you post bi-weekly. The reason to do a more frequent show is because you get more impressions if you have an audience, which means you can sell more advertising. But until you build an audience, it doesn't really matter. So I would actually focus on what is sustainable and what gives you more time to market the show, promote the show, build that audience. So in the beginning, I would consider doing a bi-weekly show or even a monthly show so that you can really do a good job of making a great piece of audio and socializing it. I think over the next couple of years, shorter podcasts will continue to win out. People want shorter and shorter things because our time is our most precious resource. It's hard to slot a new show into our rotation. And especially when it comes to hitting play the first time to try your show out, they're more likely to do that if it's a lower commitment. So consider doing shows that are less than 30 minutes, less than 20 minutes even. And I think there's a big opportunity for you. All right. Ashley, any questions that came up there in that section?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you paused for a moment because we have a couple of questions that have come through, and I wanted to call attention to a couple of the things that you've noted here about episode length and frequency, because there have been some comments about where folks are saying that they need to be able to produce more consistently or frequently, which is something that may be true in the blogging world or, places where what you're trying to do is increase a particular type of web traffic. But it sounds like what you're saying is that in terms of podcasting frequency, a good strategy would be to, focus on the quality of the production that you're creating, even if it means you're doing episodes a bit less frequently. And then as you're, and use that good content to build your audience. Yeah. And then, you can increase the frequency once you've established a bit of a name and a voice. Is that kind of what you're hinting at?
Yeah, I think my unpopular opinion is, there are a lot of people that will tell you, if you want to start something, just start. And that's true in a lot of ways. But if you want to build a commercially viable show that builds an audience in podcasting today in 2021, I think you need to go out of the gates with a well-considered, well-produced product. And you need to then keep that pace moving forward. I am continuously surprised by even more than 60 episodes into Creative Elements, I frequently every week get a ton of new listeners listening to episode 1. And if
Gotcha.
your episode
Yeah.
1 is not good or not a good representation of what the show has become, they're not going to keep listening. They're not going to listen past episode 1. They're not going to subscribe.
I'm very guilty of that, of abandoning a new podcast because episode 1 doesn't capture me. We're very stingy with our time and attention. And I do. So some folks are asking, how do you create some of that interaction, that kind of compelling content where an audience feels like they're being engaged? Do you have any tips for how to kind of maximize that level of audience investment from episode 1? Or is there anything that's worked for you in particular?
Yeah. Well, one more quick note on the previous subject, which is people think I need to publish more and more frequently. Besides having a really good product, you have to understand that discoverability in podcasting is not really there yet. And even sharing is difficult for podcasts. It's easy to share an article. It populates on a social feed really nicely. Podcast episodes are way, way harder to share. So really the way a show grows still to this day is either word of mouth from your listeners or getting featured by podcast listening apps. And in either case, your content has to be really, really good for somebody to choose to share it or for a podcast listening app to feature your show. Now, on your question of how do I make an engaging listening experience, again, this comes down to quality, but you need to think about your episodes as being a conversation. It needs to feel like I am a part of the conversation, either because it's a solo show and you're speaking to me directly, or because we're having an interview, but it's a very comfortable interview where the host is listening actively and continuing the conversation. There's nothing worse than listening to an interview and the guest saying something that has an obvious follow-up question that the host misses because they're too tied to their notes. It's such a bummer. So you have to be an advocate for the listener and hit those follow-up questions and say, you know what, I hear my audience screaming at me. Tell me how you did that, or tell me how you felt when that happened. Because then it's like they're listening in real time and they have the question. And then you as a host read their mind and ask that question. That's what I'm striving for.
So the audience feels represented by you as a host. Right. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And there's another question here that I think is related. Somebody asking about co-hosting versus single hosting, as I think the reverse of what you're saying might be true also, which is it can be equally disengaging for co-hosts that are wandering off topic or a little too inside jokey, where the audience then feels like they're not even a part of the conversation.
It could be. I think about this a lot with my other show where I do have a co-host, because the listeners who have been with us for a long time, they recognize and love the inside jokes and the things that are continuing themes. But it makes it challenging for new listeners to jump in with a new episode and feel like they're in on the joke. So there is definitely a trade-off there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it looks, and there was another question. Was it one of Chris's questions about, and I think you sort of touched on this, but maybe you could just say a bit more about the attention span of the audience. And we were chatting a little bit about this before we went live. So my background, I worked at TED and was a speaker coach for TED Talks. And one of the things that we focus on a lot is you can only really effectively communicate one idea in an 18-minute talk, for example. And it sounds like you're drawing an analog there for podcasting, which is if what you want to create is a high quality, engaging piece of content in, spending 15 or 20 minutes or 25 minutes focused on knowing exactly what you're sharing with your audience rather than meandering and kind of, exploring, that might be a more powerful way to get your audience engaged.
Yeah. I walk through my entire production process beginning to end here in a minute, and I'll touch on that. So we'll talk about that here in a second.
Great. Well, I'll turn it back over to you. And folks, if you have any additional questions, I do still have some others that we'll save for the end, but keep them coming, and I'll pose them to Jay as we go along.
If you do want to have guests on your show, I want to talk a little bit about how to book guests and how to think about booking guests, because I think the quality of your guests actually determines the quality of your show. I do a transcript for every one of my episodes, and that transcript service shows me the percentage of time that I'm talking versus the guest. And I find that most of my episodes are actually an 80-20. It's hilarious how close it is to a Pareto principle, 80-20. I shoot for at least 80% of the time the guest is speaking. And if that's true, then you can totally see why this statement is true, because your guests and their thoughts, what they're articulating, is the majority of that episode. So it's important to have high quality guests. And when you're booking somebody, I would ask yourself, do they have a strong understanding of the topic that we're here to talk about, the idea we're here to share? Not only do they have a strong understanding, but do I have reason to believe that they're able to articulate that perspective well? Because if they can't articulate the perspective well or make it understandable to the audience, it doesn't really matter. The audience isn't going to grasp it. Are they easy to listen to? This comes down to, will they have good equipment? Do they speak slowly? Do they not use jargon? You want this to be something that is very listenable and enjoyable to the ear. Do they have name recognition within my audience? Will it be a draw for people to click play? Will it be a draw for people to hit subscribe in the first place? Could they even potentially bring their own audience to my show? Because that might be one of your strategies for growing your audience. I would tell you to reach really high when you're booking guests. As I told you, I'm continuously surprised that people still go back to episode 1 when they find my show for the first time. And that episode 1 is with Seth Godin. Episode 2 is with James Clear. So that is a clear signal to the listener that this person is able to bring on high quality guests. And it's also a high quality signal to future guests that this is something they should take seriously, because they will use your previous guest list as a reason to believe that this is something for them to do. If you're going to reach out to somebody that is a high reach for you, if you have a potential for an introduction, try to get that, because it's going to be more likely they read your email and respond than if it's a cold email. And when you do send this...
I was actually going to ask on the previous point that you just made. So episode 1, Seth Godin, you didn't have as much of a library of content to send to Seth and his team to say, would love for you to come on this podcast. So how do you, there's a bit of a catch-22 there before you've already had great guests on. How do you let folks know that you're legit and that it's going to be a good interview? Can you speak a little bit to that about, how you kind of build that momentum?
Totally. I actually have the email and a screenshot coming right up.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Perfect.
Yes. No, it is a catch-22. So I'll explain that here in a second. But my goal in an email to a guest is to let them know in a short period of time why you're reaching out, give them a short pitch of the show, let them know exactly how much time you need of them and what they need to do to prepare. This should all be within one scroll of your thumb on a mobile phone that they can read this. It should be direct, it should be specific, and it should have enough in that email to make a decision. And lastly, this is very important, make sure you give the potential guest a generous window for recording, because there's nothing worse than getting an email of somebody pitching you to go on their show and saying, yep, okay, I'm in, I'll do it. And then they say at the end, let me know if there's time the next week for you to record, or the next 2 weeks even. These people that you're reaching high for, they don't have time in the next 2 weeks. Anytime they have the next 2 weeks, they are protecting with their life to actually put into their work. So if you have a generous window of, do you have time in the next couple of months to record? They're much more likely to say, of course I have time the next couple of months. I can find that easily. And this is actually the email that I wrote to Seth. So I took part in Seth's first podcasting course, the Podcasting Fellowship, with my first podcast, Upside. We had some nice press for that show, and I followed up with him to let him know, like, hey, because of the Podcasting Fellowship, this happened, which he was grateful to hear about. And then later, literally years later, I followed up on that same thread saying, hey, I'm doing a new show, and you would actually be a great guest. So he saw that there was actually a history of us corresponding and me respecting his time and me taking part in his courses so that he felt comfortable saying, yes, okay, I'm willing to do that. This is an example of the format I just laid out, where I have, a very clear tag in the subject line, interview request. I have a little bit of relational content at the beginning saying, like, specifically, your Instagram and new Facebook group have transformed my apartment because my girlfriend, now fiance, loves your account. She's talking about it so much that I'd love to have you on this show. Here's the pitch. This. It's a high quality or a high production show through a podcast network. It's been featured in Apple Podcasts. Would you be open to a 45-minute remote interview for the show? If so, I'll send you a scheduling link.
Love this. This is like the pitch equivalent of exactly what the point that you were making about yes. how to clearly articulate one idea clearly in each episode, but this is, to a guest. It's very clear what their call to action is. They have enough information to know, to make their decision, and they already know just from what you're providing what their next steps are. And yes. There's that personal element of, here's how you've impacted my life, which of course feels good for someone to know that that's why you're reaching out to them.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that.
Same thing works if you want to get an introduction. You can basically just phrase it a little bit differently. So instead of it being personal, you can send it to somebody and say, could you forward this email to this person? Here's what they need to know. And that person who can make the intro can literally just forward that email and say, hey, are you interested in talking with Jay? Makes it really easy. So I know we're running up on time, so I'm going to try to work through this entire front to back process of how I produce the show in kind of like a high level overview way. And I'm going to walk through literally all the steps, and I go really above and beyond with this show. So some of these things aren't critical if you're just getting started, and I'll call out the ones that are kind of nice to have, not absolutely necessary. But again, this is all high level, step by step. So first, I identify the guests that I want to have on the show, and I keep track of my guest pipeline in Airtable. Airtable is a database. It's also a spreadsheet, but it can be visualized in different ways. It's where I manage, the stage of the process that guests are in, so that I can, in parallel, be working on multiple episodes at a time so that I don't get burned out. And it's where I manage the entire process workflow. This is a view of like the spreadsheet view, which is hard to see. I have the slides available after this workshop too, if you want to zoom in on it. But this is the spreadsheet view. I can also look at this in a Kanban view, which I'll show here in a second. Once I've identified the guests that I want to have on the show, I start to reach out to them. And this is the Kanban visualization of the same table in Airtable, which a template for this is actually available in Podcasts Like the Pros, the course that we were talking about earlier. But I can see my target list. I can move them into pitch sent and put notes like, here's the date that I sent the pitch. When they interview or when they schedule the interview, I can put the interview date that they've scheduled and move that into interview scheduled, then interview recorded, then scripting, editing, scheduled, published. Literally, I can have lots of concurrent episodes in flight at one given time. Scheduling, I use Calendly. Historically, I've used Calendly. I'm actually looking to move to SavvyCal for what it's worth. But historically, I've used Calendly. And here, guests can select a date, select a time. It sends them a Google Calendar invite then that has the Squadcast link that I use to record. It has everything they need to know about getting ready for the show. A couple things like, hey, make sure that you wear headphones. Make sure that you are near your router if possible. Go on Do Not Disturb, plug your computer into power, the prep stuff. Then I prepare for the interview. And I use Notion for this now, but for a long time I used Evernote. I have a template made where I do some research. I have the guest name, I have their bio, I have some facts that I find about them. But the big thing about the research process that I want to point out is exactly what Ashley said earlier. Every episode of the show, before I go into the interview, I kind of choose like an angle. Like, this is the idea I want to really dive in on and help people walk away with. I just spoke with a guy named Chris Sutherland, who his third TikTok video went viral. And then every video on TikTok since has been super successful. He grew like a 2 million person audience in a matter of a couple of months. And so I wanted to talk to him about hey, in 2021, what do people who want to get started on TikTok need to know? And that was the frame of the episode. So I fill this out with facts from my research, some questions that I want to touch on. I actually don't pay too much attention to my questions and my notes during my interview, even though I'll have it on my second screen. Just the act of doing the research and coming up with questions, I will then be primed to remember essentially what I wanted to ask, and I can listen more actively and bring them up when it makes sense. I do the interviews remotely with Squadcast, which I shared with you. I save the files from the interview to DropBox. And then I actually bring in an audio engineer to do the first step of the mix here. He takes our 2 separate audio tracks, cleans them up, combines them into one interview track, and eliminates the ums, the ahs, the filler words, makes that one file of the interview itself sound really, really good. I upload that to a free transcription service called Otter.ai, which is beautiful because it will separate the different speakers, and then you can label somebody's voice, and you have this working transcript of the interview, which is really helpful because then I go into my editing mode. I like to make my episodes an experience where I cut out things that don't matter. Sometimes I'll move questions around. Sometimes every episode I add in ad breaks. And I also script the intro, the outro, and the voiceover sections of the show. And to do all of that, I need to have a working transcript that I can turn into a full script. This is what my voiceover and editing looks like in GarageBand. This is like a complete episode where the top track is the original or like the full interview file from my audio engineer. The second track is my voiceover that I record based on what I script. And the third track is like external B-roll audio, which often comes from the creator themselves. In this episode, Matt has a YouTube channel. I asked his permission to pull in clips from his YouTube channel to illustrate some of the points. And then when we export that, you will have a full listening experience of not only, the fact that Matt made this video on YouTube that he just brought up, but we can actually listen to it in the episode so you can hear more about it and have a more full experience.
Jay, can I ask, we have some folks who are asking about equipment and software, and you have mentioned so far several that I am also familiar with and, could moonlight as a brand ambassador for Airtable and Otter. Love those. Are there either pieces of equipment or software or tools that you use that you feel very strongly about? Are there things that have increased your capacity to build high quality products, or have you done more of a trial and error and you're finding different things? We've got some folks, Diana in the audience is mentioning that Anchor is an app that can do as maybe a sort of end-to-end type of experience for this. I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this was built from, I wanted to use free tools that were available circa 2018. And so I've started to introduce some new things into the mix, but there are a lot of ways to do this. And so I'd rather focus on the process and what we're trying to get in each step and let you kind of choose the software. I think Descript is probably a really great option, but GarageBand came on my Mac, and that's what I learned how to use. You had it. And that's what I continue to use because the process is set. It works for me. It works for my audio engineer. And even new apps I could introduce into the process, it's not going to save that much time, and switching costs are pretty high. So I'm going to keep going with this process, but Anchor could be a great choice. I haven't actually looked into using it in my process. I would probably look into Descript first if I was going to look into a separate app because they do transcripting, but they often charge by the minute of transcript, whereas Otter is totally free.
Right. And for those of you who maybe joined a bit late, part of the content that we're talking about today is how to begin your podcasting in a really high quality way, but on a bootstrapped budget, right? So I think in that sense, I love what you're saying about in the same way that you want to prepare an email to pitch a guest to come on your show in a way that creates as little friction for them as possible, you also want to create space for yourself in the tools that you use to experience as little friction as possible. So if you've got immediate access to something and it works, it fits your need, then use that. And maybe later on you have the capacity or the desire to switch to something that's more, I don't know, that serves your needs where you are further down the road. But I appreciate the idea of like using the tools that you have at your disposal and developing that way.
Totally. I'm going to fly through the rest of the slides here, and then we'll get some more questions here at the end. This is what the working script that I create for each episode looks like. I have the rough transcript in Otter, and as I'm going through and saying, okay, this question and answer is saying, this question and answer is staying, this question and answer is staying, here's where I'm going to put voiceover for the ads. I'm copying from the transcript and putting into my script template so that I know where I am in the episode and where my voiceover breaks are, so that I can record those voiceover breaks. This is, again, not absolutely necessary. This is useful for me to know where I am and what I'm building on the fly, but this isn't totally necessary. But it helps me to do my scripting of those voiceovers that I then record for my intro and my outro, my voiceovers, and then I export. I showed you these 3 tracks. I export each of these 3 tracks back to my engineer, and then he takes that and stitches them all together, puts on my intro music, my outro music. I do a final review, just like listen back through and make sure that the spacing is good. Do I have enough spacing between question and answer? Do I have too much spacing in some places? Then I upload it to what is called a host, my hosting provider, which creates the RSS feed. I use Megaphone. The host takes all the information you give it, the title, the description, the audio file, the image, if you want a separate image, and we'll send that to all of the different podcast listening apps. You don't have to upload to Apple Podcasts and to Spotify and to Pocket Cast. You put it in one place, your host, and it gets syndicated to all those different platforms. Then I put my finished audio file back into Otter so that I can get a full transcript of the episode. And I actually have a VA from Upwork clean it up, because Otter is automatically created through AI. It's not perfect, so I have an actual human run through, comb through, and make it as close to perfect as we can get. I build a separate and dedicated web page for each episode. This is, again, kind of an above and beyond type of thing, but part of the reason I do the show is to drive more traffic to my own website, and these episodes, I find, can rank on page 1 for the guests that I have if I construct the page the right way. So I actually make a dedicated page for each episode of the show that has the episode embedded from Spotify, which I chose specifically because there's a follow link on it. People who are on the webpage can subscribe on the page. I put show notes, links, the full transcript. I even build audiograms using a tool called Wave that I can send to the guests with their unique custom art that my sister makes. Again, this is a budget thing. My sister is an illustrator and she was willing to do this. So she did, but you don't need to have custom artwork for every episode. You don't need that. That's an extra touch that I was able to make, and so it was worth doing.
It's a cool visual identity.
Yeah. And I publish from the host. You'll see it in different apps. You'll see it in Spotify and Apple Podcasts, everything else. I email the guest. Sorry again, guys, that I'm kind of flying here, but want to make sure that I get through all the slides. I email the guest to let them know their episode is live. I give them a link to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, their episode-specific webpage, and I attach their artwork. I let them know there is no expectation to share this, but it is appreciated. Thanks for coming on the show. And then I market it. I tweet about it. I put it on Instagram. I put it on my own channels. I send an email to my list about it. And then I start it all over again. 20 steps front to back that I put into the show. And the whole thing doesn't cost me very much, but it does take 9 to 17 hours per episode, which again is actually broken up over multiple weeks, because I interviewed people last week that their episode won't actually air for maybe 2 months because of how many interviews I do up front. So I can batch the content and make sure that I have interviews ready to go so that every week I can publish. Which I know sounds like a lot, but I wouldn't do it if I didn't absolutely love doing it. This was a super high level view of all those steps. If you do want to learn more, this is why I made podcasts like the pros. Each of those 20 steps that I just ran through, I go into a lot of depth, screen captures, the specific workflows, why I edit things the way that I edit them, the exact tools and equipment that I use, everything that you would need to know to produce a show as high quality as Creative Elements for a similar price. I go through ideation, audio quality, getting the best quality you can, what gear to use, some basics on editing, also how to hire an audio engineer because I don't think you should edit your show. I talk about interviewing, how to interview well, how to do really good research. I talk about my full production process. I do a deep dive on all the tools that I use: Airtable, Calendly, Squadcast, Otter, hiring a VA on Upwork, how I do my editing. This module 5.7 alone, people tell me is worth the whole course because it's a whole overview of my exact editing process. Final review, uploading to the host. I talk about marketing the show, advertising and sponsorship for your show, podcast networks. I interview the head of the Podglomerate. There are 36 episodes here. It kind of ballooned as I was making it. I just kept thinking, there's more I need to tell. There's more I need to talk about. It's 5 hours of content, typically $199. Right now, it's on sale for $159 with the link in the chat. It's 20% off. I hate discounts. I almost never run them. I won't run this one for long. So if this is something that's interesting to you, I would totally jump up on this right now because it doesn't come around very often.
Love that. And I have put the link in the chat here for those of you who are ready to go. And Jay, I don't know that you did this intentionally, but several of the questions that have come up in the chat, like how do you find an audio engineer? Are the steps different for if you're interviewing guests versus not interviewing guests, and you've identified how do you begin the editing process? It sounds like you've got entire modules in your course devoted exactly to that. So those folks who are asking about that, check out the course. We're getting a sweet J. Clouse Discover event discount, which is a rare and exciting find.
Yes. All those things are answered in the course. If you're not interviewing guests, the process would still be the same. I just talk about what I call the episodic middle a little bit different. Instead of editing an interview, you would just be editing your solo show. But your solo show should still be directed towards, as Ashley said, one key idea per episode. And you should be ruthless with cutting out things that are duplicative or repetitive or unnecessary to the listener's experience. And so the editing process is the same without guests. The course does skew a little bit towards having a guest, but mostly because I think that introduces more complexity. But you can still do the same process without guests. If you want to stay connected after this, and we have a few more minutes for questions, these slides are available at that URL listed here, workshops.jclouse.com/podcasting. You can get the slides that I shared today. You can connect with me on Instagram or Twitter at jclouse, and I would love for you to listen to Creative Elements. But Ashley, any other questions that you saw that we should spend some time answering here?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jay. While folks are typing in their last questions, I'm going to answer Kathy right now. Yes, there is a replay available for this entire event that we've done here. So if you came in late, you'll get an email that has a link to this event so you can make sure that you catch all of the wisdom that Jay has shared. And as those of you who are typing in your last questions would also love to hear, please join me in thanking Jay for this incredibly valuable, accessible session today. Share what you are most excited to put into use. Really curious to know, what you're all hoping to translate this wisdom into. Please join me in thanking Jay. We did have a couple of additional questions coming up. that came up a few times. I'm just scrolling back here. It looks like we've got some folks who are who have done a little bit of podcasting and are maybe trying to level up a little bit. And Arati asked, this is just an interesting curiosity, what parts of hosting or producing do you, Jay, dread doing, but know that they're pretty critical to your content?
The hardest part for me at this point is actually outreach and getting amped up to send a bunch of emails that are cold to people that I respect and would love to talk to, but I know are probably hard to get a hold of and will likely ignore me or say no. So that is difficult for me to get amped up to do. I also, once the interview is recorded and I get the file back, the initial file from my audio engineer, it's going to take me 4 to 6 hours, usually around 5 hours, to finish the edit on that episode. But it's actually 3 parts in that final edit. There's the listen through and the reorganizing and deleting of some of the audio. Then there's scripting, and then there's recording. And those are 3 distinct processes that are different modes to get into my head. So lately I've been trying to even separate that out so that during the week I do the initial listen through and reorganizing, and then I can script, and then I might record the next day, because it's often exhausting to go through a whole edit and a script and then feel like I can bring the energy that I want to the recording. So I'm trying to separate those aspects a little bit more. I saw some people asking about the legal aspects of a guest.
That's come up a few times.
I have heard from some folks in the industry that they're moving towards release forms for their guests. And I have not done that personally, to be honest. All of my guests have had some sort of email trail with me that they're willing to do the show. So I don't know what true risk I have or don't have based on that, to be totally honest. If it's something that concerns you, then I would err on being safe and doing a release form for your guests. And it's not unlikely that I'll do that in the future too. It's obviously another line of friction between getting the interview recorded. And so at this point, I've kind of played the card of, I would rather run the risk of someone telling me, you know what, I changed my mind, I want you to take that down. And even though I probably don't have to, I might do that instead, because most guests probably won't. I've never had an issue with a guest trying to ask me to take the show down. So take that for what it's worth and do what feels right to you.
Well, and that feels consistent too with what you're saying about clearly communicating what you are hoping the guest will be sharing on your episode, what the purpose of that episode is, and understanding that that person, those guests are qualified to talk about what you want to talk about, feel comfortable with it, and that you're, staying true to what you've communicated as you're going through that production process. So I appreciate and for some of the other folks who asked about the legal components. Jay has said he's never run into an issue with somebody saying that they wanted the episode taken down. If, my understanding with working with TED Productions in the past, the only time that we get into issues occasionally with distribution. So if you're, and if you're selling an episode or to somebody who's going to then distribute it in a way that your guest was not made aware of, that might be a reason to, like Jay said, be on the safer side. But, if you're just doing your own distribution and publishing, I think that might be a bit, a bit safer. And I would love for you to share, just as we're wrapping up here, any final words of wisdom that you might have, Jay, and from Chris here, who's asking how you stay motivated through all of the, how do you keep that energy? It sounds like a part of your trick is separating pieces of the work so that you can bring all of your energy to the interviews that you're doing, right? The things that are going to end up in that recording. What else do you do to stay motivated when you're kind of, busy in all of these steps?
I think motivation has to be kind of innate, or this isn't going to be sustainable for you. Like I'm motivated because I love doing the work. I love having the conversations. I love listening through a final episode and saying, this is awesome. This is something I'm really proud of. When I feel the most burned out is when I'm running too close to my publish dates and don't have it done. So I just try to get ahead of things, especially in terms of recording the interviews, but more and more trying to get ahead of the editing process each week so that it doesn't feel like a fire drill before it goes live. But motivation is something that nobody can solve for you. It has to be something that you intrinsically want to do. At this point, I sell advertising on the show too, so I actually have commitments, which is probably fueling part of the motivation. You know, I've sold a certain number of advertising spots or a certain number of impressions, so I have to publish. But on weeks when I have life happen or really can't get myself going, which almost never happens, I will sometimes rerun an episode that I liked and say, hey, this week, no new episode. I'm actually going to rerun this one. I do a 2-minute intro to say why I'm rerunning this one. And that's it.
That evergreen content. Well, this is terrific, Jay. Really lovely comments coming in here. Brandy asking, excited to sign up for the course and wondering if she gets lifetime access to the content that you've created.
Yep, it's lifetime. It's not limited in any way. So if you join the deal now, which again, if you're compelled to take this course, I would do it now because
now is the time.
I don't run discounts. But you will have access to it whenever you're ready, Brandy.
Well, we are so grateful. Like Jay said, really lovely discount for his course for this limited time, the next 2 weeks. May as well go ahead and sign up for it now. You'll get it for lifetime. So Brandy, as soon as you're wrapped up with what you're working on right now and you're ready to dive into podcasting like a pro, you'll have that course ready to go for you. Lots of folks saying, thank you for your wisdom. Really excited to dive into the course. So I think you might have some new course members in your cohort after today's session. Final reminder, folks, you'll have a replay of this entire event. So all of the steps that Jay went through, you'll be able to, pause and digest those as needed. And we've put the link to the full-length course, which has detailed information about all of the editing process, the interviewing, basically end to end, how to create a beautiful podcast, which Jay is a terrific example of. Definitely go and check out Creative Elements as you're building up your own motivation for putting creative content out into the world. It's a gorgeous podcast. Jay, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. We feel very lucky to have had you here, and I am excited to sign up for this course.
Amazing. Thanks, Ashley. You've been a great host. Thank you, everybody watching at home. Again, if you want to connect with me, all the information's here on the screen.
There you have it. And you'll get the slides too. So stay tuned for that. And if you liked this, if you like having access to this type of creator content and workshops, like the video and subscribe to the Discover channel, and you'll be notified when we have great guests like Jay coming on to let you in to their creative processes. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Jay, if you could hang out for a second after we kick off the live here, would love to debrief with you. And everyone, we will see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.